Welcome to the Columbus Metropolitan Club. Founded in 1976 by 13 visionary women leaders, CMC's mission is to connect people and ideas through community conversation. To carry out its mission, CMC explores public policy issues, current events, and lessons in leadership at forums like this every week. From its beginning, CMC has welcomed everyone. I'm Deb Hackathorn. I am the incoming chair of the CMC Board of Trustees. I'm also a principal with Civic Point Government Relations, so it's particularly fun for me to see all of these people that I also get to see in my day job. I'm pleased that you are here with us today. Please take a moment to look at the back of your forum flyers today as well. There you will see the many generous organizations that support this not-for-profit Columbus Metropolitan Club, and we could not exist without their support. Speaking of supporters, we want to thank today's sponsors for our forum: Advanced Drainage Systems, Delco Water Company, Burgess & Nipel, the Green Funds of the Columbus Foundation, and the Franklin Soil and Water Conservation District. We are also grateful to the Center for Human Kindness at the Columbus Foundation and the Columbus Dispatch for presenting today's live stream, which is being carried on CMC's social media platforms. Please join me in thanking all of our sponsors. And now, let's get to today's community conversation. So, raise your hand, please, if you like clean drinking water. Awesome. Yeah, we thought that might get everyone. If you raise your hand, then you're in the right place. We're going today to look at a critical collaboration to conserve Ohio's most precious natural resource, our water supply. Governor DeWine's H2 Ohio program united 3 agencies to create more wetlands, reduce fertilizer runoff, and ensure access to clean drinking water. For the first time, CMC welcomes 3 members of the governor's cabinet for a frank examination of Ohio's efforts to keep the state's water supply clean and safe. And to introduce today's expert speakers, please welcome to the podium Jason Rayfeld from today's forum sponsor, Delco Water Company. Jason, you're up.
Thank you, Deb. Good afternoon. My name is Jason Rayfeld. I'm the Chief Legal Officer and Chief Strategy Officer for Delco Water Company. There was a time where I didn't need to use these, but that time has passed, so I'll put them on. Some of our executive team and our board members are here today at this table. Normally, they don't let me drink anything but Delco tap water, but hopefully today they'll make an exception and I can drink some bottled water. We appreciate the opportunity to speak to you and introduce today's esteemed panel. For those of you that may not know, Delco is a water utility headquartered in Delaware County. We're a member-owned nonprofit utility governed by a 9-member elected board. We have 4 treatment plants, over 2,200 miles of water mains, and serve an 850 square mile service area encompassing parts of 8 different counties. When I tell my friends I work for Delco, some of them have said, "Oh, I've seen your tower from I-71. To which I say, yes, that's one of 33 towers that we use across our service area. Delco is the largest water utility in Ohio. Now, don't misunderstand me and think that I mean we have the most customers. We don't. Columbus, for example, has multiples of the number of customers that we have, but we serve a larger geographical area. We are different types of systems. Urban systems are dense. Regional systems are spread out. We are regional. Some of you may be wondering, what are you doing down here in Columbus? And that would be a reasonable question, particularly when the staff at the Columbus Division of Water does a fantastic job of taking care of the water needs of our capital city. However, the development locating in central Ohio is bringing companies to us that are asking for 3, 4, and 5 million gallons a day. For comparison, a household uses about 220 gallons per day. Large school districts, 30, 40, 50,000 gallons a day. The Columbus Zoo, about 100,000 gallons a day. It's a lot of water. Ohio, and particularly central Ohio, is undergoing such a massive development boom that it's hard to fully comprehend the scope and impact it's going to have on all of us. So Delco is here at this fine event because the development is no longer just in our backyard or our side yard. It's in our living room right in front of the television. We're spending a lot of time on how can we supply the massive water requests from giant users while continuing to serve our current members. We all need a regional plan to support the development because it's too big and there's too much at stake to leave it to one-off solutions. Delco's recently begun sharing a regional solution that will work for everyone, but it's not without challenges. It won't be easy, it will be expensive, and it will take time to build. No regional solution will happen quickly or be inexpensive. But if we don't implement a big picture solution, we may all feel the effects of too much demand and not enough supply very quickly. Water is our business, so we are keenly interested in the topic of today's panel. And although we are passive receivers, we are very concerned about PFAS, or forever chemicals. But frankly, our two top regulators are on this panel, so there was no way we were going to miss the opportunity to introduce them. And now it's my pleasure to welcome today's esteemed speakers. Brian Baldridge, Director of the Ohio Department of Agriculture, Mary Mertz, Director of the Ohio Department of Natural Resources, Ann Vogel, Director of the Ohio Environmental Protection Agency, and our host, Natalie Fahmy, Ohio State House reporter with NBC4. You can read more about today's panelists in your forum flyers. Natalie, we look forward to today's conversation.
Okay, well, I'm excited to be here today. First, I just want to give all of you guys a clear picture of what we'll be talking about. So I want to ask, we can start with Director Baldridge here, what exactly your department plays, what role it plays in improving Ohio's water, and why we should care.
Well, thank you, Natalie, and thank you for this opportunity. Glad to be with you this afternoon. The role that the Department of Ag plays are through our 530 employees, our 10 buildings, our 5 laboratories out in Reynoldsburg. You know, our role is obviously working with the ag community through the process of H2 Ohio. And a lot of different ways that we're working with them, and I'm sure we'll touch on those later, but just really taking a deep dive to our ag community. You know, I tell folks, I remember being a Southern Ohio County Commissioner and serving on the Ohio Commissioners Association, and within that board, we would have all kinds of lively discussions about water quality back in the early 2012, 2013. So it's a great opportunity to be in this role on the operational side of H2 Ohio and water quality here in our great state.
Director Mertz.
Sure. So again, thank you. It's a lot of fun to see so many friends in the audience. Thank you all for being here and being interested in a topic that is so important to us and helping us figure out this puzzle on how we protect Ohio's water, because that's what it is, a puzzle. And so our piece in that puzzle at the Department of Natural Resources, I mean, we care about water for a lot of reasons. Recreation, we maintain reservoirs. I mean, we have a lot of interest in healthy water at ODNR. But the program I think we're going to focus on a little bit today with H2 Ohio, our role in that program has been looking at natural infrastructure. How do we use natural infrastructure to clean up our state's waters? And by that, I'm really referring to wetlands, right? So not only wetlands, but mostly wetlands. What are those natural things we can do besides building the big wastewater treatment plants and all of that hard infrastructure? What can we do with nature? How can we use that to slow down the movement of water across the landscape, to absorb the nutrients that are harmful, to sequester carbon, to provide great habitat? There's lots of good reasons for wetlands. But our focus in the water quality program we're really talking about today has been about how to use wetlands and other natural infrastructure features. And that's what we've been investing in across the entire state.
Good afternoon. I'm Ann Vogel. It's a real pleasure to be here and see a lot of familiar faces and new. So I came from the governor's office, where I got to be part of H2 Ohio from day one, as the governor started thinking, okay, what's going to be, you know, his signature for water quality in Ohio, and specifically focused on Western Lake Erie Basin and Lake Erie, of course, but then bringing in the Ohio EPA to think about, okay, well, how do we do this statewide, and how do we provide some additional funding to the need that's out there in terms of, for Ohio EPA, water infrastructure, whether drinking water or clean water infrastructure? How do we figure out where our lead service lines are? How do we take people off of failing home sewage treatment systems, septics? So those are the 3 pillars that Ohio EPA has been involved in. I'm very proud that it's a statewide effort and has been for all these years. Our 4th pillar now is the rivers. So the New Rivers Initiative that the governor announced and the General Assembly funded in this last budget is the 4th and an exciting area that we'll be digging into in the coming weeks and months.
So, Director Vogel, you brought up the budget and all the funding there, and the H2 Ohio initiative, it's fairly new. The governor introduced it in 2019, but we saw substantial funding for it in the budget that was just signed into law. So can you just tell us more about what the program is and how it works?
H2 Ohio, the big, okay, so yes, a lot of you in this room, by the way, were at the table with us at the beginning, so I want to acknowledge our advocacy partners. And I think what makes H2 Ohio special and what made it different than anything that had been tried previously was that the three of us were at the table, for one. The agencies were brought together, and the governor also brought in the agricultural community and brought in the advocacy community and brought in anybody who had the shared vision and the shared goal of clean water to actually make a difference, and then funded it, right? And put real money behind it and asked the General Assembly for their support. So the program took off in 2019 because, and I'm still going to meddle in ag space because I was there, because the folks that designed the program were at the table with us in the governor's office from day one. And so that's the kind of the history of the program. And then we're now in the third budget. And I am grateful to the support of the General Assembly because that number has kept going up, which I think is a tribute to how they must think we're spending it wisely, right? They must think we're making progress with the money that they've appropriated.
So, Director, go ahead.
I was just going to jump in on the money piece of it. I have a cheat sheet in front of me. I don't have the numbers memorized, but I happened to add it up just before this started. So over 6 years, $610 million. So if that's not a commitment, I don't know what is, right? Over $500 million, $610 million is Governor DeWine and the General Assembly, their commitment to address, and that's on top of all the other money we already spend, right? So there are all these base and foundational programs to protect Ohio's waters. This is just the money on top of that to make this program work. So no question of the commitment. Now we just gotta, we're always checking ourselves, are we spending the money right? Are we spending it so it makes a difference? But kind of gives you sort of the outer limits of this program, and there's more yet to come, so.
And I'll just touch on it just a little bit, bring a little bit of a different story along, obviously. And Director Vogel and Director Mertz were part of this at the beginning. I was part of it in the legislature. So when the governor's budget came into the legislature in 2019, I was on the subcommittee on ag, finance subcommittee. So it was really exciting for me in February of this year as the governor made the announcement for me in this role. It was really exciting to really look at the operational side of this, where we were on the other side of it trying to figure out how we were going to fund it in the legislature. But for me, it's great to see how well the agencies work together. Comments to everybody prior to me getting in this role. But for me, that's the exciting part of it, really looking at it on both sides and seeing where we're at today and moving ahead, like Director Mertz said.
So we're talking about all this money that's going into ensuring that Ohioans have clean water. You may have seen in the news recently, a recent study showed that half of the country's tap water contains so-called forever chemicals that can cause health issues. What's the current state of Ohio's water? How necessary is all this money?
Well, yes, I did see the report, and the governor has been very actively engaged in the question of contamination in drinking water, and specific to PFAS. The minute we had a detection in 2019, this is the before times, the governor instituted a PFAS action plan. The Ohio EPA went out and tested 1,500 public water systems across the state of Ohio with the goal of identifying where hotspots may be. And so we're pretty far ahead in terms of just determining and knowing where where the concerns may lie. Now, on the regulatory side, the US EPA has a proposed MCL that may go final at the end of the year, and we'll be following that in terms of the rulemaking and what it takes. But more importantly, from the H2 Ohio perspective, and what the governor's commitment is to help those small communities, particularly, to be able to treat to be able to figure out the sources of the PFAS. And yes, I mean, there's always going to be the next contamination. I mean, I think we know that. So.
And I guess from my standpoint, PFAS, and again, I want to bring up the legislature, but I was able to carry legislation and pass legislation that we put in place that stopped training that was being used in the first responder setting. And so we were able to put a stop to that, knowing that that chemical is still being used in emergency operations, but it was one way to slowly, as we recognize these forever chemicals that we need to be very concerned about, but it was one way to slow that and try to do our best to keep it out of our water systems.
And not just forever chemicals, right? So a lot of what drove this initially was algae blooms, right? Toxic algae blooms up on Lake Erie. But it's not just Lake Erie. I don't know how many folks in this room might go over to Buckeye Lake. So an issue there as well. For the past few years, we've been good. We haven't had to put up beach advisory. I mean, that's where it hits me. When I have to put up a sign to tell people not to go in at the beach or not get in the water, I mean, this recreation is part of my business. So that's very disappointing. That's not what I want to see. So Buckeye Lake has had beach advisories in the past with toxic algal blooms there. Hasn't happened in the past few years. We want to keep it that way. That's why one of our wetland projects is out at Buckeye Lake, and it's beautiful too. You can go see all the great waterfowl there as well. And we're working on a couple of other projects there as well. Same thing up at Delaware Lake. We're working on a big wetland project there for the water flowing into Delaware Lake to prevent those algae blooms. And I want to recognize just for a second, sorry, but Franklin County Soil and Water, we appreciate your partnership on a project out by the Darby. So the Hell Branch Meadows West Wetland Restoration. That's a really important project to us because maintaining the Darby, I mean, it's a state and national scenic river. If we let that go, we should be ashamed of ourselves. And so we're all working hard every day to make it work, and you are our partners to make that project happen, and we appreciate that.
Director Mertz, can you further explain how wetlands work and how they're really working towards preserving Ohio's healthy environment and the waterways?
Yeah, so there are people in this room who could explain this much better than I, and I see you now, so forgive me. But I mean, you can imagine there are many different forms of wetlands, but the basic idea is it slows down the water. That's the first thing, to slow down the water and allow mostly the soil to absorb nutrients. Up here, we're worried about phosphorus. Other parts of the state, maybe we're more concerned about nitrogen. And so the soil to absorb those nutrients, for the plants to uptake those nutrients. These wetlands will require maintenance and work. But, and we have to keep an eye on them, and we have to measure them every step of the way to see what's working and not working. And like I said, I've got some of my great scientists in the room. I know that could explain this better than me. But we're trying to take straight channels that just race, agricultural runoff and other runoff down to the waterways. We're trying to slow that down. We want the stream to take a meander. We want the sediment to fall out. We want the absorption to happen. I mean, it's, you can kind of envision it, which is sort of the beauty of the wetlands, is you can understand how that is going to help. And we have great data out at Grand Lake St. Mary's. We've been doing this for years. We have years of data that shows that we are slowly improving that lake, both through improved agricultural practices and a huge series of wetlands we have encircling that lake. We can measure the water going in, we can measure the water coming out, and we can see the difference. But there are all sorts of different wetlands, not just a straightforward, make a stream meander or divert a river through a wetland. There are floodplain mitigation wetlands. There are lots of different versions, but that's essentially what we're trying to accomplish.
And I'll just add to that from a standpoint of trying to, Director Mertz mentioned, slowing down the flow. And one of the things that we're doing in the ag space is obviously two-stage ditches. So before, those tiles coming out of those agricultural fields dropped right into a waterway and off to the races. Well, now as we do a two-stage ditch, we slow that water through natural vegetation and so forth before it gets to the ditch. So it's kind of part of that, as Director Mertz mentioned, that slowing of the nutrients moving through the water systems.
So I want to move on now to an analysis by the U.S. Census Bureau in 2019. It found that people of color, low-income individuals living in rural areas, tribal communities, and immigrants are more likely to go without running water and basic indoor plumbing. Is there a connection between social justice and access to clean water, and does the H2 Ohio initiative at all address water equity in Ohio?
Yes. There is a connection, and yes, we do address it. It's a critical component of what we do at the Ohio EPA in terms of infrastructure investment. A significant portion of our principal forgiveness grant dollars go to disadvantaged communities across Ohio. We work very closely with the advocacy communities in both rural parts of the state in Appalachia, but also in our urban communities, to, for example, help with identifying lead lines. We were able to celebrate, along with Cleveland, a big success last year in terms of eliminating lead service lines from publicly owned daycares in Cleveland. So that's an example of something that we celebrate, but we can always do more, and we are always looking at that issue. Yeah, good question.
Yeah, and I'll add that to that as well. So we have made some intentional choices for some urban wetland projects that we're excited about, as much for their educational opportunity as the results. Both are important. And also a lot of, so I've only talked about wetlands. Part of our program now is also acid mine drainage. We've always had an acid mine drainage elimination goal, and we do a lot of that at the agency, but now through H2 Ohio, we have some additional funding, and those are all in social, mostly in economically disadvantaged parts of the state, right? That's throughout Appalachia, where we're doing a lot of that work, and so we've really stepped it up with these general revenue fund dollars. There's a good chance to point out to this audience too, that's an area where we've been able to attract some private dollars too. So you know, I like to point out to the General Assembly, thank you for supporting what we do, and no, I'm not sitting on my laurels. We're out there talking to private companies, and I have 2 private energy companies now that have invested in acid mine drainage programs with significant sums of money, and I appreciate that, because we can't do it all with the dollars we have. They've also invested in some wetlands projects too, but I think those acid mine drainage projects specifically speak to addressing those areas of Appalachia.
And I would just touch on it from a standpoint of ag and rural Ohio. Obviously, those challenges throughout our rural Ohio of water and water lines, you know, the population's a lot less, a lot more miles to travel. So those are the challenges kind of in rural Ohio from water lines and so forth.
Well, I want to use that kind of as a jumping off point to bring up the East Palestine train derailment that we saw back in February. There were images of the impacts that had in the air and the water. All of your departments work with ensuring clean water, which extends to clean food, whether that's fish or farmed or just healthy living in general. How does this derailment give your department's foresight to how issues like this can be addressed in the future? And do you think H2 Ohio should expand to address issues like this that might happen again?
I would
Make you go first.
always welcome an expansion of H2 Ohio. I want to say that every answer, we'll take more. We can do more with more. Specific to East Palestine, I think we're still learning the lessons of East Palestine, but one that we address and have been for the last 6 months is you know, a lot of public water systems have well fields that are very close to railroads. And, you know, I think a lot of small towns had that, like, oh, this could happen anywhere. This could happen to me. Small towns, big towns. I mean, there's, rail lines everywhere, right? So, yes, so we've been working with our public water systems. They already do contingency planning, but we are specifically asking, and they are working with us on the technical side to develop contingency plans around something like a derailment. It certainly motivated us to step up our game and make sure that our source water protection maps were up to date, and we know, where, to the extent we're able to know what's happening for groundwater. And specific to East Palestine and H2 Ohio, though, to the extent that folks are on shallow private wells, that is one area that we've been considering. Could we do some infrastructure investments that would help those people to get on the village water that is not contaminated and not affected by any groundwater coming through the derailment site? So that, there's some peace of mind things that I think that we could do with H2 Ohio, but stay tuned.
And I guess from the agricultural side of it, I appreciate Director Vogel and Director Mertz. And they were kind of on that initial response from agencies with obviously wildlife issues and obviously environmental issues from the EPA standpoint. But our participation on the side of it was a little secondary from the agricultural area. I mean, we were in contact with our local partners, our soil and water folks, our OSU Extension, Farm Bureau. We were in contact with those folks very early on and stayed in contact. And until, the governor said, let's go up and make sure that the agricultural community has a story to tell as far as no impact to their markets they're selling to. And that's what we did. We went up and tested forage. As soil testing and air testing and water testing was going on, the last key component of that in the livestock community was the forage. So we were able to do that and said that their markets were strong, their sales were strong and safe. So it was great to be part of it that way.
I think you guys can all speak to the importance of deliverables, especially when it comes to expanding H2 Ohio. Director Vogel, we just saw a river study that your department kind of headed. Can you talk a little bit about what that found in the state of Ohio's rivers?
Yeah, happy to do it. So the governor announced last week the release of the Large River Survey that took 2 field seasons for our surface water folks to, for the first time ever, go out and look at all of the large rivers in the state of Ohio at the same time. We're always out in the field, doing the fish and bugs, but this was special because we did all of them. So large rivers are any that drain 500 square miles. So any piece of a river that has that drainage area, we went out and did the fish and bugs, but we also did the water chemistry and the sediment over 2 seasons. And, basically it showed that the Clean Water Act and all the programs that you've all been a part of for all these years are working. So we've seen a huge improvement from like 18% in attainment to 86% of Ohio's large rivers in attainment for water quality standards. So it's fun to celebrate good news, but it also was great timing for our scientists to say, okay, well, here's what's left. We know where the river miles are that still need improvement. And the fact that the governor had already decided to introduce this focus on rivers was great timing, and we were able to say, we've got the science, we know where to go do the investment, and we know how to fix significant portions of what's left. So it was exciting news, and we're excited to get started on the next 14%.
And for me, it was exciting that EPA produced this data because we are kicking off the H2 Ohio Rivers Initiative, and it'll help us figure out where to focus our efforts. And if you haven't heard much about that initiative, it kind of comes in 3 parts. One is more monitoring and data collection. A lot goes on now, but there's never enough, right? So our agency will be involved in some mussel monitoring, some aquatic species monitoring, just improving that across the state to make sure we have all the data we can get. Part of it, the money will be spent on preserving those rivers that are already pristine. So we have some great clean rivers, as was outlined in that study, and other studies we have as well. And so, the work we can do to preserve those, a lot of which is either obtaining easements or land acquisition or the other activity we need to take in those riparian corridors. And that study will guide those decisions. And then the final piece of it is those rivers that are in bad shape, what do we do to restore that degradation that's occurred? You know, whether that is dam removal, whether that is a litter program, whether that is some other sort of treatment program, acid mine drainage, you know, so we have sort of a menu of options on how to bring back those degraded rivers. And so this was just funded a month ago. So, you know, we've had lots of plans in place, but we haven't started moving that. And so this is a great example of research that we can actually use. And in terms of other research too, I'll add on the wetlands work we've been doing around the state. We have contracted with a group called the Lake Erie Aquatic Research Network, and it's a fairly significant research contract to evaluate our wetlands projects and to monitor them over a period of years, so they can produce a report that says you actually produced what the modeling said it should produce, or not, whatever the answer is. You know, one of the things with wetlands, I think people at first were like, well, that's a great idea, but you do one or two, that's a drop in the bucket. What does that mean? So our challenge was, how do you scale this up? We have over 140 wetlands projects, major wetlands projects, and then we have somewhere over 150 smaller wetland projects on private land. I mean, so the goal is to scale up. We're now at a number, we cannot monitor every one of those, and it wouldn't make sense to do that, but at least we're going to get a good sample of a variety of different kinds. But I expect that to be a deliverable soon.
And as far as the Rivers Initiative, you know, from the agricultural standpoint, we're probably going to stay in our lane, or should I say stay in our field. Sorry. But stay in our space and can continue to grow. Right now we have in the Western Lake Erie Basin, we have about 1.5 million acres enrolled, 2,400 participants through that. So we're going to continue to grow on that as we expand into the rest of the state of Ohio for those best practices are being used. So we're going to stay in our field and making sure that we're keeping everything out of these rivers all across our state to the best of our ability.
I can tell you the 5 miles that need your help.
Close contact.
How important is it, you know, even if we get to a point in Ohio where the water quality looks great, how important is it to continue funding programs like H2 Ohio for the next maybe several decades?
So I'll start off from the agricultural standpoint, and it was unique for me to go to a Midwest agricultural departments of ag. There was about 13 states there, and everybody was asking a lot of questions to Ohio. Without a doubt, we are leading the charge in water quality across our country. It was clear to me at that event. I didn't realize how much we were leading the pack, but folks were constantly talking about this. So as we move forward, I mean, this is a process we know in the ag community, we want to put just the right amount of nutrients into that soil. No more, no less to produce that crop, because we know when we produce that crop, we haul that nutrients out of that field, and it's moved on in product, whether it's corn, soybeans, whatever that product might be. So we want to continue to work in that space and continue to do these best practices that truly make a difference for the future. We have to, we can't let our guard down. It's water quality. We have it. It's a top priority. It's part of our business model in agriculture. We got to have water. We got to have soil. We care about water quality. We care about soil health. It's in our business model in the agricultural community.
And I think, you know, in Ohio, water is our economic future. We have it, and a lot of people don't. And we need to protect it, both the quality and the quantity of water. This is what is going to help us going forward to attract responsible businesses that are going to create jobs and keep the economy going. You know, you look out west, and you cringe, and you watch what's going on, and that is not where we want to be. And so as guardians of your water, that is our job. But, you know, we're not attracting these big companies to come in without having plentiful water. I don't know what the future decades hold. There are some predictions there'll be movement towards the Great Lakes region, towards the center of the country, you know, with continued weather changes. I mean, you know, we have yet to see that. There's lots of predictions out there. But protecting our water supply, both the amount of it and the quality of it, I think is going to control the future of our economy in this state.
The infrastructure needs in Ohio are almost insurmountable. I try not to think about the big numbers because it's depressing. It's somewhere in the $3 billion range, at least, that we would need to just upgrade our water and wastewater treatment facilities. And so the funding is needed, but can I also say that what's needed from all of you is creative approaches and thinking about things in different ways. And we're going to be really thoughtful at the Ohio EPA to make sure that we're being helpful to the smaller systems. Are there regional solutions that are better? So I could talk about this all day, so I won't, but we've got to think about things in a different way to make sure that, just as Director Mertz said, we are being the most protective, but also making sure that we can get that water to everybody safely. So yes, we have to keep funding H2 Ohio, but it's bigger than that. The need is great, and we've got to do a better job.
And we'll move to questions from our live stream and in-person audiences in just a few minutes. If you have questions, please make your way to the microphone right back there. And if you're watching online, please type your questions into the chat. But before we ask audience questions, I have one more question for our panelists. I just want to ask, what can everyday Ohioans do to help with this responsibility of keeping Ohio's water infrastructure clean and healthy?
I'll start off with that. I guess there's an easy statement. We're all in this together as society. Whether it's a private septic system on a personal property, whether it's a municipality septic system, or whether it's the ag community. So we're all in this together, and we continue to work on it. And to the point that was brought up, feedback, ideas, out of the box, because it's continued to work on perfection in this space.
Yeah, so I know on our end, for the most part of the work we've done has been really well received, but like with anything, there's always a hesitation. Do I want that right next to me? I am so sad to say there's a few people that look at wetlands and say, oh, that's a swampy bunch of weeds. I don't want that there. So helping with that education and producing them in a way that people enjoy them and helping people appreciate and support that natural solution, I think is something that we need to kick off appropriately and communicate and articulate that. But for people to understand and appreciate that and not think we're trying to do something wrong in their neighborhood is something I would look to people who've learned more about it to help us with.
Education is huge. I am a big advocate for everybody understanding where their drinking water comes from, and let's do more plant tours. Delco, let's go. Let's all go. I think it's important. I think it really makes a big difference when people understand, where your natural resources are coming from, and then do the little things. Don't litter. Don't leave the water running while you brush your teeth. I'll throw that in there. Conservation, right? We all know what to do.
Perfect. Thank you all. Again, it's CMC's longstanding tradition to take audience questions. Doug Buchanan with CMC is curating questions from today's live stream audience. And for those of you with us in person, again, you can join him at the microphone in the back of the room.
Natalie, thank you. And thank you to our panelists today. First question. According to the federal EPA, the Great Lakes are likely to warm an additional 3 to 7 degrees Fahrenheit in the next 70 years. Since warmer water tends to cause more algae blooms, what impact might climate change have on the health of the Great Lakes or other Ohio waterways? Do aspects of the H2 Ohio initiative address any impacts of climate change that are anticipated?
Yeah, so I'll speak to that some. And I have had an incredible opportunity. Actually, we both serve on the Great Lakes Commission, where this is a conversation amongst the entire Great Lakes. And Ohio, our north coast is Lake Erie. And it is the warmest, most developed body of water with the most algae blooms. And sometimes my colleagues try to ignore me when I talk about toxic algae blooms. I don't let them ignore me. I drive them crazy. I bring it up every single time we talk. And what I try to say is, we are the tip of the iceberg. What you are seeing happen on Lake Erie is going to happen everywhere if it gets warmer. And so we have been super hyper focused on how we solve that problem which feels kind of far away here in Columbus, but it's not that far away. And it's the same thing happening on our lakes throughout the state. So I guess what I would say is, you know, all the pieces of H2 Ohio that are designed to deal with those toxic algae blooms, which we know are more common when it's warm, are designed to deal with that. So that is our focus, and we are trying to train the other Great Lakes states on what they need to be prepared for and what they need to be doing in advance of that damage. That answers the question.
Hi, I'm Tricia Strawler. I'm with Life Care Alliance. And first of all, I want to thank you. This has been an excellent presentation. I have a question. It's not a loaded question. It's a complete curiosity question. When you talk about removing dams and letting the rivers go back to a more natural state, that makes me think of like the Muskingum River that has the last, you know, functioning canal and lock system. So I'm just kind of curious if there's been any discussion about the possibility of removing those, or, you know, what's the state of that? Thank you.
So of course that Muskingum River Lock and Dam system is a state park. It is a historic treasure. I mean, it is an absolute treasure if you all have never been there. These are hand-operated locks that cross the dams in 10, 11 places from just north of Zanesville down to the Ohio River. It is an amazing journey if you ever have time to try part of it. Because of that historic designation, because of our respect for what's happened and that opportunity to celebrate our past, I don't know that currently those Muskingum River locks and dams are on that list. There are other much more high priority places where we see reduced fish passage, where EPA has done other analyses. So I don't know that those are the top of the list, in partly because they're not the right spots, but partly because of that sort of amazing historical treasure that we have there. Someday, if those become the most important places, we'll reevaluate, but there's a lot of dams to look at before we look at those.
Thank you. From the live stream audience, Nancy Nanny asks, does Ohio work with other states, including Virginia and Kentucky, to ensure quality of the Ohio River?
We work very closely with an organization called Orsenco, which is the Ohio Rivers Sanitary Commission, and so I am on the board of Orsenco. We, yes, they're primarily responsible for the coordinating all of the states that have a part of the Ohio River interest. A lot of success to celebrate there too. Orsenco just celebrated 75 years. And have seen a lot of improvements. I'm aware of the study that says it's the most polluted river in the country, but there's a long way to go, but they are having a lot of success in the Ohio River. But yes, the answer is yes. We work very closely with our neighbors.
And I would add to that, but I would flip it to the Great Lakes. Obviously, Indiana is kind of part of that Western Lake Erie Basin as well as we cross over the state line, so we're in contact with them, and Michigan as well, just talking about the lakes in general. And it was unique for me at that MASDA meeting. I was the most senior director of ag, even though I'm just a few 6-7 months on the job, but the other two were brand new as well. So it was exciting for us in the agricultural space to build that relationship here recently.
Hi, afternoon, everybody. Jack Shaner, Enviro Science Incorporated. First, congratulations to the DeWine administration for this really thoughtful, innovative program. You're getting results, and it's exciting, and can't wait for more of it in the future. A quick question for two directors. Director Baldridge, any unexpected benefits, feedback you're getting from farmers from the H2 Ohio program? And Director Mertz, we all know that not all topography, soils are created equal. You got challenges as you move around the state, especially southeast. How might you be adjusting for that? Thank you.
From a standpoint in the agriculture, from the unexpected, probably not anything really for me earth-shattering in that space, but just what is unique is the mindset where we had agricultural communities. Some of the folks were already doing best practices without a doubt. Others said, "Whoa, we need to be part of the solution." And now there's still folks that don't want to participate for whatever reason. But it's truly our responsibility in the ag space to connect those, bring those folks on board. So the unexpected in a negative way is just figuring out how to connect those dots and bring those people on board to make sure, as I said earlier, we're all in this together as society.
So in talking about projects around the state, so our model for this program has not been where ODNR goes and builds all these wetlands. Instead, what we do is we partner with local groups. And because we know, some of you might know, sometimes government is not the most efficient or quick in accomplishing all of our tasks. So that is why our partners are frequently park districts, local soil and water conservation districts, land conservancies, you know, it's all the local folks who know the land. So they are the lead in selecting where these sites are going to be, where it makes the most sense, where we can get the job done. And then we run our modeling on it and make sure that we think we're going to get the results we're going to get. But we couldn't do these projects without the local community, the people who are interested in bringing them to us. We're not just going out and saying we want to do this, this, and this. We're surveying the landscape, but it's the local groups that we give the money to, and they get it done. So.
My name is Nicholas Berner, and I had a question for Director Baldridge, please. Regarding agriculture, you talk about current projects you're doing now as of 2023. I wanted to go back with what effectively can we do to balance the preservation within the agricultural community with Ohio's wetlands, their agricultural community, as I said, and ensuring some of the sustainability for future generations, younger men, younger women that are coming up in the agricultural society. How can you conserve that for Ohio's future?
Well, thank you for that question. And from a standpoint, it is a little bit concerning. You know, the ag community, the numbers go down. The number of acres that folks are farming go up. So our numbers in that space are going down. There's concerns, you know, next generation, where does that go? Where does that land? Some of the things that have been done in the legislature, which we're heading up out at ODA, is our first-time farmer tax credit. It helps that person coming in. Also, it helps that person retiring out of the ag service to give them some tax benefits. So that conversation is continuing, and it's that balance. It's between economic development. It's between the ag community saying, you know, we have to have acres to, you know, to provide food for our future generations. So it's that constant balance that we continue to talk about.
Greg Stone with Stream and Wetlands Foundation. Thank you so much for the discussions today. They've been excellent. Had a question for everybody. So Ohio's petition ditch drainage laws have cropped up as a stumbling block for some great projects in the Western Lake Erie Basin. I was curious if conversations on those laws have reached your level, and if so, if there have been discussions about ways to potentially balance the need for water quality improvements with drainage.
So to touch on ditch line, I came to Columbus as a township trustee in early 2000 to be on the board of directors for the Ohio Township Association. They started talking about ditch line law, and I went, what is that? You know, we've got natural drainage down in southern Ohio where the hills and the creeks and it all flows. I'm like, ditch line law? I didn't know anything about this. So, but yeah, to that point, there's a lot of discussions. I think we need to be proactive as we continue to have these conversations, work with our local governments, figure out how we can continue to work through those. But it can be a little bit of a challenge as we're, you know, from the ag side of it, trying to promote two-stage ditches and putting that funding source into place, working with our local county engineers as well. So it's challenging.
Yeah, that's clearly an issue at ODNR. And, you know, I think my guess would be over the next year or two, it might bubble up, right? Because the point on a petition ditch is to move that water off the field as quickly as possible. And of course, my goal is as slowly as possible, right? So we have to meet in the middle there somewhere and make it work. You know, so there's clearly there's clearly I don't want to use the word controversy, that's not right, but clearly some contradictions there that we need to figure out. My guess would be over the next few years, maybe we really look at that whole system and figure out how we meet the agricultural needs and the water quality needs both. But it's more recently come up a number of times, I'm sure you're aware. So we'll see where that heads, but I don't think there's any solutions on the table yet.
My name is Frances Beasley. I focused a lot of my career on environmental policy and research into environmental equity and justice solutions. Can you again touch on how H2 Ohio addresses some of those specific solutions and maybe a project or two where you've seen success?
Sure. So I mentioned the Cleveland daycare. Cleveland did a lot of work on lead service line replacement at daycares. H2 Ohio was a partner in that effort. Vinton County is another example that I like to talk about a lot, where we had people hauling water in 2020, and so we've been able to extend water infrastructure and fund a lot of projects like that in economically disadvantaged areas, where we're actually providing drinking water for the first time to communities. And again, the important piece about H2 Ohio money in terms of infrastructure is that it's last mile money, it's grants, it's no strings attached. So we're not talking about money that goes on the rates, into rates, which these communities cannot afford. So that's the beauty of this money for Ohio EPA and the infrastructure improvements that we've been able to do with it. But I'm very excited that we've been able to talk about disadvantaged communities and how to serve them across the state of Ohio. The governor has asked all of the agencies to take a close look at how we are applying for these grant opportunities that are coming out of the federal government, to make sure that we're accounting for that consistently across the state of Ohio, and make sure that our focus is on serving those who cannot otherwise help themselves.
Good afternoon. My name is Adam Porter, and I'm with the Columbus branch of the NAACP. The question I have is a follow-up to a question the moderator asked. She asked about H2O Ohio and programs in urban communities. I wanted to ask if you could specify a particular program in an urban community, as well as any education programs or outreach that you're doing in the core city. When I mean core city, for example, Columbus, anything east of 71 North. Thank you.
So I'll throw out a couple answers, but one is not Columbus-based, but just very specifically, some of you might have heard about the project up in Cleveland that's referred to as Cheers. And so this is a gigantic, many millions of dollar project on the Cleveland waterfront that is specifically designed to connect disadvantaged communities with the waterfront for recreational purposes, to make that part of their community. There's communities up there that have, a mile away from the lake and have never seen it, right? And so there's been a concerted effort, some outside of H2 Ohio, so we were very involved in bridge construction to connect those communities to parks on the waterfront. And now there's a very specific program up there called Cheers, and we are investing H2 Ohio money in that for a wetland complex that is part of an entire recreational complex that is specifically designed to connect those communities. So that's just off the top of my head. I'm sorry it's not here in Columbus, but that's the one. It's to connect people to one of the world's greatest waterways on Lake Erie. And the second part of your question, I've got so excited about Cheers, I forgot about it. Was the
educational outreach? Educational outreach.
Well, I will mention too. So I don't know if you would count this, but we kind of did. So the Ohio State Fair. The Ohio State Fair attracts an enormous diversity of people. I don't know who in this room may have attended. It is everybody from all of the farm families across the entire state. but a big part of the attendees are folks who live in that neighborhood in downtown Columbus. And so we made a special effort, the 3 agencies, to work together on an H2 Ohio educational program at the fair. And we put it in the Natural Resources Park, which happens to be positioned at the gates where a lot of those folks come in. And I got feedback from my staff at the end of it. That, I'm like, what was the value? Was this worth it? What, how'd we do? What was it about? And they felt like educating those people in the community right around Columbus as to the importance of water quality and this entire programming, and just thinking about it, thinking about what we need to do. So I don't know if you would count that, but. Yeah.
So everyone, thank you so much. I wish we had more time, but I'm getting the wrap-up signal here. So we'll turn it over to our second sponsor representative, Brian King, with Advanced Drainage Systems for concluding remarks.
Advanced Drainage Systems, which is headquartered in Hilliard, Ohio, we put a new sign up on our office so people know where we are now. And if you have driven along 270, you see this large steel building that is going up over there. That's our new $65 million Science and Technology Center. And we're thrilled to sponsor this event because we got our start in Ohio 60 years ago providing tiling drainage water management systems for farmers. And so it's great to hear from each of these Ohio leaders about how H2O Ohio and the other initiatives that are taking place in this state are impacting water quality in such a positive way. ADS has strong relationships with these large and small farmers across the state, and especially in the western Lake Erie Basin, which we heard in particular is very sensitive and very vulnerable. We're happy to be working in those same spaces and making sure that the work that H2 Ohio does, which is very important, is being supported by industry. A personal story. I moved to Toledo in 2014, 2015. I don't know what day it was, but one Saturday I woke up, it was this time of year. I did what I normally do on a Saturday, which is went out for a run, came back, poured a huge glass of water. I was drinking it in our kitchen when my wife came in and said, "You know what? I heard you're not supposed to drink the water." At that point, I was done my huge glass of water. You are never more thirsty than when someone tells you you cannot turn on the water and drink it. It is unbelievable how thirsty you get. So that's my personal story. We need clean water in Ohio. Our customers, and that's more than just farmers, that's the people that develop residential and commercial spaces, it's government agencies, it's municipalities. They have found that stormwater management, managing water, has a very rapid impact on your environment, both positive and negative. We need to make sure that it is positive. And that's because it's not simply about draining water, it's what happens when the water goes to wherever it goes. We need to make sure that when it ends up in streams and rivers and ponds and lakes, it's in a condition that we want to enjoy that water. At ADS, we think about the life cycle of a raindrop. We capture rain, we convey it away from where you don't want it, you store it in a place where you want to keep it, and ultimately you remove it or put it back into the environment in a condition which should be better than what it was actually captured by. So that's how we think about our products. That's what we do all day, every day. And we know that some people don't find that infrastructure, what we call hard infrastructure, they really don't find it that attractive. Now, everyone at ADS thinks plastic pipes are the most beautiful product ever made, but some of the folks in the room don't like to see that. And so hard infrastructure needs to work with green infrastructure, and you heard that today. Those two things working together provide a solution that improves quality of life, not just from the people who live in that area, for the water that you actually drink, but how do you then enjoy that as well? So at ADS, our reason is water, and we mean it. We think about that all day, every day in the things that we do. We also have an ADS foundation, and one of its core tenets is to make sure that we increase access to and enjoyment of clean watersheds. Not only is it great to drink clean water, it's fun to play in clean water as well, too. So our mission is to protect this most valuable resource and ensure that water is managed in a way that increases quality of life. So with that, I would like to thank today's sponsors who joined us. So Delco Water Company, Burgess & Nipel, the Green Funds of Columbus Foundation, Franklin Soil and Water Conservation District. Thank you very much for the sponsorship. Thank you as well today to the Grange Insurance Audubon Center for hosting us. Shout out to Noctura Brewing, who's going to open a brewery right over there, so you'll be able to come down here, enjoy nature, and enjoy water in the form of beer. So that's a shout out to them. I really love those guys. Thank you to our virtual seat patrons and to the Center of Human Kindness at the Columbus Foundation and the Columbus Dispatch for also supporting today's live stream. And once again, our very special appreciation today is speakers, Brian Baldridge, Mary Mertz, Ann Vogel, and our host, Natalie Fahmy. Thank you very much. All right, so what's next? Please make plans to attend next week's forum, where we'll be talking about ghost kitchens, virtual restaurants, and delivery apps, how tech is disrupting dining. Sounds kind of fun. And please take a moment to answer the short survey that you get in your forum flyers. We could not do this without you. Thank you for joining us, and everybody have a great afternoon. Thank you.